So hi, Gaurav. Thanks so much for being here today. So it's such a great pleasure to have you on the channel, and I was very happy that you agreed to share your incredible story with our community. So first, can you share with all of us about your journey, especially your personal experience with having had polio at such a young age, and how that has influenced your approach to life and your career?
Sure. Thanks, V. It's such a pleasure to be on this channel with you. I've watched many of your episodes in the past, and I love how you interview very interesting people, but also how you share your own learning journey and give career advice and things like that. So it's just a real pleasure to be on this channel with you. Perhaps I'll just start with a little bit of a snapshot of my professional background, just for context. And I actually recently retired from full-time work to move from Toronto to Victoria, BC. Now I know you've been to Victoria, BC. I saw one of your trip visits, and so you know how beautiful it is. And I've just always wanted to come here because it doesn't have snow and ice, and that's always created quite a challenge for me. With my crutches and working with leg braces and stuff. So I've always dreamt of moving here, and so far it's been really good. I guess we'll really pay off when it gets through winter. But I was very fortunate to have had a great career. Primarily in the actuarial risk area, but majority of my career was at Manulife John Hancock. I had like 7 different roles over about 19 years, and I got there as a new fellow, and I left as a senior vice president in risk management. So I did lots of different things in between. Then most recently, I was a global chief actuary and chief risk officer for Just Financial, which some people may not know, but it's a fraternal insurer that's been based out of Toronto for about 150 years, operates in Canada, US, and the UK. Now, I'm not fully retired in the sense that I'm still on the board of American Express Bank of Canada. I also am on the advisory board of the Smith School of Business at Queen's University, and I chair the advisory board of Ascend Canada, which is an organization that focuses on supporting Pan-Asian business leadership, a really great organization I've been involved with for many years. And I also sit now on the management investment committee of CERA Life. So, I'm trying to keep my hand in, hopefully maybe do some more corporate board work, but also, do more to support DEI and other community building kind of initiatives, whether it's locally or nationally. Now, with respect to my personal background, yeah, I was born about 53 years ago in India, and I got polio at the age of 3. So I did have a vaccine. A lot of people asked me, and I did have it, but it didn't work. I'm not sure why. Maybe it wasn't kept cold or something. But as a result, I ended up, walking with crutches and leg braces ever since. Now, to be honest, even that was really a lot thanks to my mother, to be honest, because right after I got polio, she was told that I wouldn't be able to walk. But she was also told that I had about 6 months or something where I could strengthen my muscles and my nervous system before things kind of like solidified and there wouldn't be much progress. And so she really got to work, and then she got some help, and she got me in an exercise regime for like 6 or 8 hours or something every day. She actually got a lot of hassle from her own family for, making me exercise. They thought that wasn't particularly nice because she had to make me do this. But it worked, in the end, I was able to walk with crutches. And of course, that's made a lot of difference in my life. And, it really was one of those things that's a bit of a story that became part of the narrative of my life that, doctors said I couldn't do, wouldn't be able to walk, but through perseverance and help with my mother, I was able to overcome it. And that's like, those are kind of stories we tell ourselves, right? That strengthen ourselves in the future. My father also made a lot of sacrifices, like a lot of people, immigrants. I think we all have that sort of history, and he was a highly educated, accomplished mining engineer. He was actually one of the youngest general managers. He used to run 2 diamond mines in India before he left, but he left all that to go abroad. And we went to Africa. He just thought there'd be better prospects for me outside India than in India. And we moved to Zambia, and when I was 7, and then it was interesting, about 3 years later, I just learned English and everything when I was in Zambia. I ended up getting a chance to go to boarding school in England. And my parents, again, said, well, if other kids are going to do it, my brother had gone to a different one the year before. They're like, he can do it. And they sent me off, so even at the age of 10, I would fly by myself from Africa to England to boarding school with my crutches and everything. And, it again became part of the narrative that I could do other things that people do, not to limit myself. So it was very helpful. And then we immigrated to Canada when I was about 12. And, my parents, unfortunately, in Canada were never able to work in their chosen fields. I mean, I guess that's the story for another time, but, that's kind of common story for many immigrants who come, professionals. But for me, I was very fortunate in Canada. Thanks to the public health system, I had back operations. They fused my spine when I was 12 because it was collapsing. And, so it's interesting. I mean, for me, I'm always very thankful for the public health system and the public education system, which I benefit from. So, unlike most people, I never complain about taxes. So, I think we all have to recognize that, you can't have all the good things that we benefit from if we don't pay taxes, for example. But, for myself, I was in hospital for about 6 weeks. Or maybe even 8. I can't remember. So 6, 8 weeks. I know it was over my birthday. I was on this bed that was like an ironing board. I was had to lie flat, and they strapped me and then flipped me because I had to keep my spine completely straight. And there was no internet or anything. So back then I was just completely bored all the time. And so I would just think a lot, and I had to kind of came to the realization that, I mean, at that point I was totally dependent on people, right? Like I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move, right? And realized that I didn't want to be as dependent on others. And to do that, I need to really focus. So I really made a big mental shift at that point in time. When I came out of hospital next year, my marks went way better. Like I just dramatically, by that end of the year, I got the highest mark in my junior high. Then I went to an international baccalaureate program in a public school. And I graduated with the highest marks in there. And then I went to Queen's University and I got the gold medal. So I was really, at that point, I can always trace it back to that time in the hospital when I decided that I need to focus, and drive myself towards a career where I could essentially have financial independence, because financial independence allows you to not, be dependent, and you can do, what you kind of want in your own life and govern it the way you want. And then I went on to do a master's in math at Waterloo after Queen's. And I finished my actuarial exams, and most fortunately, I met my wife when I was in Waterloo, and we subsequently had 2 kids who are now grown up. So anyway, that's a snapshot of my professional and personal life.
Yeah, it is such a great story to hear, especially to see how you overcome a lot of challenges, and also saw how much support that your parents provided to you, right? Because I know for me, my parents are so great. I feel very lucky to have how much they support you. And for your story, your mom just still encourage you regardless of what the doctors say, and just keep going. I think that's that determinations provided a big push. And same thing with your father sacrifice as well. So I'm glad that you had that great support system throughout your life and your journey. And of course, I see in the hospital, the time when you mentioned, I think that is where the big mindset changes that you say, right? Because I think it's true. It's really a lot of success is actually, at first we have to have that determination, that mindset. We have to have the right mindset for us to change and grow. So for me, this story is very inspiration, and for a person that for you encourage so many challenges and you overcame them all.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
No, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because for me, there are challenges, and part of my whole life was, I was very fortunate with my parents. My father was very loving, and he actually would have been very happy sort of helping to take care of me. My mom sort of pushed me to be independent, and so I felt I had that love. But I also, some of my biggest challenges were really when I decided that I would just leave home, and and because of my experiences having gone to boarding school, and because I wanted to kind of forge my own, almost a separation. So just so I knew that I could do it, and so, it was interesting that, I had these challenges when I left Winnipeg to go to Queen's, and then later on when I decided not to come back to Winnipeg and stay in Waterloo, So those really interesting, big challenges for me. I think, I could have gone to university in Manitoba, and I decided that I would, go instead halfway across the country. My brother I actually have an older brother, and he was very supportive too. He actually took me out in the summer. He drove, he and his friend actually drove all the way, it's 24 hours driving, from Winnipeg to Queens so I could see it. But I decided I'd go, and it was, it was a big challenge because it was very icy and just where the residences were and stuff, and I didn't have accommodations in any particular way, so I just had to kind of make do, plot my routes and think about where I was going to go and what I was going to do, and I think that kind of thinking and planning and almost risk management approach of thinking about scenarios it really helped me in the future, because again, it's sort of helped the way I think, is to kind of plan ahead a little bit and just think through different scenarios. I'm always doing that, just so I can be prepared. And then and at Queens was great. I was in the business school, but also wanted to be an actuary, so I went ahead and just took a whole bunch of additional math courses. So I would take additional courses on top of my regular courses, and that was really great. I mean, it sort of it actually pulled my average up, because in math, if you're good in math, you can get higher marks than, if I took like easier courses, but sometimes it's really hard to get really high marks, but in math I could do well. So it actually, it's part of the reason I think I got the gold medal was mainly because I took extra courses, but I took them in math, which I enjoyed. And, that allowed me to get into Waterloo for the master's in math program. So that was really, that combination. I know you have the same, which I sort of admire, somebody who's got that sort of math and business, but then you've done the MBA. Well, I did the other way. I first did a business degree, then I did a math degree. But I think that combination actually was really helpful in advancing my career. So I'm really glad of those choices, of kind of having done that. And then when I graduated, it was a tough decision. I'd worked in the summers at Great West Life because my mom had worked there, and she'd introduced me. I was in systems, but then later on, I had a job in ALM, and they'd made me an offer, and I could have gone back to Winnipeg, but I actually tried really hard to get options in Toronto and Waterloo, and I had an offer from Canada Life, but coming to Toronto seemed too much, So, and I got a job offer at Mutual Life in Waterloo. I decided I'd stay in Waterloo and not go back home, because it just felt regressive to kind of go back, and I wanted to forge my own life. So that was pretty good. I mean, it was tough. I was living on my own, writing exams and working. I had my own apartment. And my parents actually had some financial troubles, and so I would send them support I could and stuff. But I'm really happy I took those risks. I think, again, I've been a risk manager and stuff, and part of it is I know from a risk perspective, it's not about avoiding risks, it's about thinking through risks, and then the greater risk you have, in some ways, the more return you get. And the same for myself. When I look back, maybe because things worked out, I look back and say, I'm glad I took those risks to venture out on my own, because it really helped me build self-confidence and drive to do things. I kind of had to keep being successful so I could pay my rent. I had to keep doing things, and as I got successful at it, it gave me confidence to take more risk and do more, including like when I left Waterloo later with my wife, when I got engaged and moved to Toronto, and went to Manulife. So that that kind of risk taking is really important, I think, no matter where you are.
Yeah, because like I could see that like throughout your story, right? It's really about your aspiration to be independent since young, as well as like later on you touched earlier that like also the financial independence, because like I can realize it and appreciate that the more you get older and have everything going on as well. So I think it's really great to see how you overcame the different challenges and working toward like independence. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there isn't, like, I think for people with disabilities, there isn't a sort of, I think for most people, they have a sort of a simple sort of narrative, or the expectations in life, that you do this, this, and this, and easily with people with disabilities, it can be a different narrative that you'll become more dependent. And it's unfortunate. A lot of that is because people can't control the economics, I think. I mean, the more you can control your own economics, and part of that is unfortunate. I mean, I like to do more to help people with disabilities, getting more engaged in the economic system, because I think they have a lot to give. And I think if people, employ more people with disabilities and they give them more opportunities, then I think it's a win-win. People get access to strong resources, and people with disabilities have that sort of economic independence, the kind of thing I always wanted. I don't want to be dependent on the government or my parents or somebody else to kind of support me in a sense, because that just takes away independence. So yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, you had a very successful career as well, with so many different roles and at different companies, and even like right now with the current role as like a board director. So how do you think like your experience with disability influence your professional journey? Like, and what advice would you give to others with disability pursuing their career goals?
Yeah, that's a really good question, V. I mean, the one thing I would say is that, when I walk into a room, I mean, at one level, I know that people look at me walking with crutches and they'll make assumptions about me. I mean, even though disabilities may not be relevant at all to the job, we're all human and we make, these assumptions. And that's the same with gender, same with people, race and many other attributes, right? People will just jump to conclusions, whether it's relevant or not, And unfortunately, many of stereotypes about people with disabilities is that maybe they're not capable. You don't see that as much when you watch movies or something. You certainly won't see many people with disabilities being leaders or that kind of thing, right? So at some level, I always know that I had to contend with that, but I also know that I can't change who I am. So I just tend to not let that enter my mind too much. It's interesting with video conferencing. Actually, I noticed it's been what 3.5 years now, I guess, with the pandemic, and things really shifted, right? And it's really been interesting because with video conferencing, people aren't aware that I have crutches. In fact, when I got onto the board of American Express, as you mentioned, Bank of Canada, that was all done by video. Like, it was just a recruiter who found me on LinkedIn, and he and I chatted for a while, and then went through a interview process that took like, I don't know, 2-3 months. But they never, they kind of knew that at some point that was in my bio, but it was very different, right? But in my career until then, almost always when I walked through the room, people would see that I had crutches. I mean, one little tip I would say that I heard early in my career that I did follow, and maybe others would want to use, is that was a tip I heard once about trying to dress one level more formally than others in a situation. So, I can't speak as much for women, but I can say for a guy, for example, if people are wearing business casual, you might wear a jacket. If people are wearing jackets, you might wear a suit. If you're people wearing suits, you might wear a fancy tie. And I used to have quite a few fancy ties, actually. I like ties, and I used to like colorful ties, I guess I would say. And things like that, you can use that to kind of, at least I felt they would help counteract the stereotype, because I think if you're a little bit more formal, it just makes people take you a bit more seriously. And to be honest, even if it didn't, it gave me confidence. And I think that's really important. Like, you have to have confidence, in many situations, especially situations where you need to feel engaged, where you need to speak up. So I'm a big believer in that. I think if you can do anything to give yourself more confidence, whether it's actually real or not, it doesn't matter. As long as it's in your mind and you feel like, yeah, they're going to take me more seriously, I have a right to sit at this table, I have a right to say something, you'll feel more comfortable saying it, So that was like one of those things. I mean, but like anybody, I have my strengths and challenges. I mean, but my disabilities, I think, actually helped me in many ways have some of my strengths. And I think that's true for a lot of people with disabilities. I mean, there's just life skills you get, and it could also be true for new immigrants, or people who are, if you're a mother or parent or whatever, you get life skills, and they're relevant to the work. I mean, one of the things, like I mentioned a few times, is I always feel like I had to solve a lot of problems, because the world isn't kind of designed for me as much in all situations, and my disabilities and constraints. So I often have to find a path. Like, I have to think, and then stick with it. Like, I can't just be like, okay, I'm just going to do this. Even when we moved to Victoria, I had to we really want to find a house that's completely flat. In Toronto, my house is very vertical. I said, okay, for my next stage of life, I'm going to have a very flat house. So we had to find that sort of thing. And so that's one of those things. I also often have to think ahead. I can go to some place, sometimes even restaurants or places, I have to think about, well, where will the washrooms be? What, so you kind of have to learn about thinking ahead and planning ahead, which, again, like I say, helps if you're in risk management or anywhere. The other thing is, I think I often see the very positive side of people. Like sometimes I'll be going someplace and I'll see somebody who like I've had situations when people will cross the road, run across to open a door for me. You know, they'll just, I see a positive side of people, and so I've kind of got accustomed to freely letting people help me, but also asking for help. And then that also sort of opened me up to asking other people if they want help. And that kind of thing really helps strengthen relationships. So I feel like I've always often enjoyed people, and I sort of trust people to kind of, and I find usually that works out. Like, you know, it helps you build trusted relationships. So those are kinds of things that I think I actually benefited from my disabilities, and I think people with disabilities often will have a lot of those kind of attributes. And the last thing I would say on this front is that, you know, there are times when you have doubt, right? You're like, can I do this? You know, should I do this? And I have a little, you know, like I'm sure, well, many people may have a little mantra. I used to have a little mantra that I would say sometimes to myself, like this just went along the lines that I think came from my mom, which if they could do it, then why can't I? You know? And so I just ask myself that, because sometimes they say, can I do it or not? And I'm like, oh, these people can do it. I mean, I can. I mean, it may take me a bit longer. I may have to do it in a different way, maybe a little bit unconventional. And I think those kinds of things just reminds me that everyone has, you know, limitations and strengths. And if we want to, you know, succeed, we just have to go ahead. We can't, you know, find an excuse. We just have to do it.
Yeah. You know what? My mantra is the same. Nothing is impossible.
There you go. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so I
Great.
resonate a lot when you mention it, because it's true. Everyone have different limitations, so it's really like about playing to your best advantage. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and most people are, you know, they're not that much usually better. It's just that sometimes you may think, oh no, I can't do it. They just, you know, but it's great. I mean, I love the way you did this video channel. You know, I'm sure at some point you were like, should I do it? And you just did it. You know, and that's great. Like that's the kind of thing I really admire in people.
So yeah, so in your previous roles, like I now want to hear more about like whether you encounter any challenges related to accessibility and inclusivity in the workplace. And if so, like how do you address these challenges, and any changes you want to see in the corporate environment today?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, you know, my career wasn't too impacted by my physical disabilities, mainly because I just worked in an office for the most part. But there were times, I mean, it's interesting, both when I started at Manulife back in 90, you know, like the late 90s, and then again when I joined PwC, when I left Manulife around 2014, both times there was, you know, trouble with something as simple as parking. So for me, transit, just when I first came to Toronto, I tried using it. It just wasn't that accessible, especially in wintertime, walking and the subway stations and things. So, you know, I went to the parking office and said, hey, can I have parking? And the thing was, I'd actually knew, because I looked around, that they had free disabled parking spots that weren't being used. Because, you know, unfortunately, there aren't, you know, the workforce is just, you know, badly underrepresented with people with disabilities. Just the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is much higher, and there just were a lot of you know, spots that weren't being used. And at both places, it was interesting. I was told no by the person who ran it. They said, no, we have a line. You got to just wait for whenever. And, you know, as I mentioned, my character is to kind of problem solve and persevere. In the first situation, you know, I just found the officer who, you know, the AVP who ran parking, and went to them and said, hey, listen, here's the deal. Like, there's empty spots. I need one. Why don't you just, and once they heard my logic, they were like, sure, you can have one, because they realized that I wasn't impacting anybody else. I mean, it wasn't like anybody else was using those spots. So they're waiting, and they let me have it, and there was no problem after that. And so that was fine. And oddly enough, when I got to PwC, I had the same issue. Person who, you know, I explained to them what I needed, and they said, no, you can't have one. You have to wait in line like everybody else, and it might take 6 months or whatever, because we got a long line, because they had a limited number of parking. And in that situation, it was interesting. I sometimes I would just it was a public garage or whatever, and I just could get in there, and I met the person who ran it. It was a really interesting man from Somalia, and you know, would chat once in a while. And so when this guy said no, I went to him and I said, hey, like they say, because they have limited spots, can you release, you know? I said, because again, there are these disabled spots that are not being used. And he said, sure, you know, tell them to call me up. And I'll release a spot for them, so they can give it to you. So we did that. But but one of the things I talked to the partner or the head of Actuarial at PwC at the time that I was working for, and I'd known him very well at Manulife. We'd worked together before, and that's why I'd moved to PwC. And I told him the story, and he said, we really need to do something about this. I said, yeah. And so we actually did escalate it up to HR and various things, just so that they could change the policy and approach. And they were quite good about, once senior people heard about it, they understood that, yeah, no, this doesn't make sense, right? And so, at that point in time, being later in my career and stuff, it was important to not just, and I was happy to have somebody like Marco who was supportive of change as well. So I think it's really important to try and create that kind of change. I mean, I've had lots of roles in the past that required travel, and so that there was an intersection. But reality is that when I worked on the John Hancock merger, I had to fly to Boston a lot of times. Later, I was a VP of Risk and Capital and of Hancock, and so my manager was in Boston. Most of my team was in Boston, but I was really fortunate. I had leaders who never really questioned that I could travel when I said I could, and supported me in all that. And one of my biggest worries in many of such situations is that there could be somebody who's actually quite kind-hearted, and then you say, I don't want to put this pressure on this person to travel. So what? I just won't give them that opportunity. Like I'll send somebody else, and because of that, they actually can take away opportunities and stuff from somebody, because they think I couldn't do it and didn't want to put me in an uncomfortable situation. So I think it's that's actually often one of my biggest worries. That somebody it's sometimes you worry about the people who might be a bit meaner or something and want to take opportunities, but actually sometimes the kind-hearted people can also take away opportunities without even thinking about it. They actually think they're doing you a favor, but they're not. They take away an opportunity for you to take a project or do something, because those roles were pivotal to my career. I got the Star of Excellence in Manulife because of my work on the John Hancock merger. The VP job really opened a lot of doors for me later on, because the head of John Hancock became the head of Forsters Financial. I met him because of that job. He used to be in Boston, and he invited me to join Forsters when he became the president of Forsters. So those kind of relationships and things were really important, but they wouldn't have happened if somebody had not given me that chance.
Yeah, that's actually interesting about like the worry that but you are right. Like sometimes it's like maybe the person that have the best intention, but then it's actually have some other implication because they're not in the situations, right? So how do you manage that worry?
Well, part of it is sometimes I think again, you just have to think through that. And once you realize that, what I tend to do is, I'm quite open, so I tend to share my context, and I let people know, like, I've talked to some people about potentially, in the future doing board positions or something. And I let them know that, for example, I'm okay with travel. Like I just put on the table so people know, because then, what you're trying to do is replace, people's assumptions with actual facts and knowledge, And I think, and that can be for anybody. I've known people who, maybe you're a young mother and people may just make some assumption, oh, she can't do this or that. Well, they don't know that person's context. Maybe she can't, or maybe she has no problems traveling or whatever it is. So I think it's true for people with disabilities. It's true for a lot of people when they don't have. So my strategy is really to share, maybe a bit oversharing, but I will try and put my context and let people know in different ways, so then they understand that what I'm comfortable with, what I'm not, what my goals are, and then we can get that alignment, because if the person really is kind-hearted and does want to help you, and they understand that, hey, this is not something that bothers you, or this is in alignment with your goals, they will help you. But if they don't know any of that, they just look at it and just make an assumption, because in the absence of facts, then they could make the wrong assumption. So that's my strategy, is to kind of share and let people know both my goals and what I'm okay with. And if there's something that really I need an accommodation, but it's a small accommodation, I'll just let them know that. And usually it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And so, I think, and sometimes you also have to advocate for yourself, right? It's like about your sharing, about like explaining, communicating in a way that's like effective communications that you're trying to do in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, part of, Yeah, exactly. Like if you want to be on a board or something, you have to let people know you want to do that. You have to let them know what their constraints are. You have to let them know what you're looking for, and then that helps.
Yeah. So yeah, your whole journey is really like a testament of like your determination and resilience. So finally, so if you you can give one message or a piece of advice to people with disability, like who are striving for success and independence,
Sure.
what would it be?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you only have one life to live, right? And I do believe that people should do as much as they can to achieve the goals that they desire. I mean, the world isn't designed for people with disabilities, and I know the issues can be really compounded for, if you're from sort of traditionally disadvantaged groups like, if you're female or LGBTQ plus or BIPOC, et cetera. So, those are realities, right? However, you still need to my philosophy is just that you need to make the most of your life, So I really suggest as much as possible, if you can, like, don't focus on the past too much and don't ask too much of, what if questions. That's one of these things that sometimes bugs my wife. She's like, what if blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I just haven't, since I was young, I never have time for those kind of questions because that's just hypothetical. The real world is the way it is. And, sometimes things are just not fair. It's the way it is. But I think the question really is like, how do you advance as much as possible towards your goal? And I think that's always been my thing, is to just, so I really encourage people to just keep pushing. My advice is to share with others, like I said, your goals, what you need to move ahead. That could be sometimes maybe you need a good high profile project or a mentor or a new role or new skills. Share that with people. And when you find people who are like-minded, who appreciate you, then take the risk and strengthen those relationships. Try and make your mentors into your sponsors, and just don't stop trying, because I think people, everybody deserves to be as successful and independent as anyone else. And so I do, that would be my main thing is just, not to let, I sometimes worry, with a lot of discussion on DEI and everything, that people may think, oh, everything's telling me I can't do it and I can't do it. And I think that's not the right message. I think as much as we can try and change the world, we also have to kind of just do as much as we can ourselves to move forward, because the world may change, but you only have one life, and that time frame may not align, right? So you have to do that and to find those allies and things. I'd also like to just share, my biggest advice, and we've kind of touched on already, for people who are working with people with disabilities. And my main advice to people always is not to make assumptions. Like, I've always appreciated people who just ask me, like, they'll just say, like, are you okay with travel? Like when I was senior vice president of risk at Manulife, it was a global role. I had to go to Asia. I've been to, I don't know, whatever, like 10 countries in Asia. Most of the countries that Manulife operates in Asia I've been to. And it was, people didn't ask me a lot, except, if it's just important that they just understood I could do the job. Like, it wasn't a matter of making an assumption. And I just asked people that if you're not sure, just ask somebody, just say, hey, this job requires blah, blah, blah. Are you okay with that? Or do you need an accommodation? Is there something, like, when I travel, the only thing really I need to do is I need to check in my bags, because like most business people just take a small bag and, carry it on. It's too much for me to be lugging a bag around the airport and into the airplane and stuff like that. So that's not a big deal. I mean, a lot of people check in bags. That's the only thing I need to do. Other than that, I can travel like anybody else. So, if somebody just asks you, what accommodations you need, can you do it? That's all, and so that's why I really encourage people to do. And I think, again, it's not just for people with disabilities, it's true for almost anything. Still making assumptions, just ask somebody, what do you need to be successful? Is this the right thing for you? Can you do it? And that's the thing that's most relevant. Not all these assumptions about, what people's capabilities are beyond what just based on stereotypes.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think at the end of the day, you have to stand up for yourself. You are the one that can take actions to have a better life, to change things. If you just wait for others, you're gonna be disappointed.
That's right.
Because if they help you, great, but what if they don't, right? So it's you're gonna be disappointed in them and then feel bad about it. when
Right.
it's in your hand to really like live your life, like you say, like everyone have one life. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, very much so. So thank you very much.
So thank you again for being here today. And again, like I think throughout the conversation, you also touched on like representative, right? So I'm very glad to have you on the channel and like to share about your story with like our community as well.
No, thank you very much, V. It's, I was very much looking forward to the conversation. It was great, and I love the way you're very engaged in all these different issues, and all the best to you and everyone in your audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.